Comrades, listen well, for the world you inhabit is not the neutral, benevolent order you have been led to believe. From the moment you were born into this society, the system conspires to tell you that your labour, your mind, your very existence, is secondary, dispensable, and replaceable. It whispers to you that your worth is measured only by the wages you earn, by the obedience you render, by the consumption you perpetuate. But I stand before you to declare, with unflinching certainty, you are more valuable than the system wants you to believe. The capitalist world thrives upon the subjugation of human potential. It is built not upon merit, not upon virtue, but upon the extraction of labour from the many for the enrichment of the few. Your hands create the wealth that lines the pockets of the ruling class. Your intellect powers the machinery of innovation, yet the rewards flow to those who own the factories, the banks, and the means of production. You are alienated from the product of your labour, separated from its purpose, and reduced to a mere instrument in the grand design of profit. And yet, this very system expects you to bow, to accept your marginality, and to imagine that your life, as value, is determined solely by your wage slip. Do not be deceived. This world, forged in the fires of exploitation, functions on the illusion that some lives are inherently worth more than others. It breeds competition among you, convincing you that your fellow worker is a rival rather than a comrade. It masks your collective power, convincing you that you are powerless to alter the conditions of your existence. Every law, every institution, every custom has been shaped to ensure that you remain divided, distracted, and subdued. But the truth, buried beneath layers of ideology and false consciousness, is revolutionary in its simplicity. You are the source of all value. The factories, the offices, the fields, the streets, they exist because of you. Every machine hums because of your labour. Every product, every service, every coin of profit originates from your toil. The wealth that capitalists claim as their own is nothing but the condensation of your effort, stolen and accumulated by those who wield power without producing it. The oppression you endure is not natural, it is systemic. The poverty, the insecurity, the exploitation, they are not accidents of fate. They are engineered by the structures of capitalism itself. And this is why your awareness, your unity, your organized action is the greatest threat to the system. For when the working class recognizes its own strength, when the oppressed unite in consciousness and purpose, the foundations of this unjust order tremble. Comrades, the system depends upon your silence, your resignation, your fear. But know this, the moment you claim your value, you begin to reclaim the world. The collective power of the workers, of the labouring masses, is the only material force capable of overthrowing the structures of exploitation. Reforms alone are illusions. Charity cannot liberate, only the conscious. Organized struggle of those who create the wealth of society can dismantle the machinery of oppression. Let the ruling class tremble at your awakening. Let their false ideologies, their hollow promises, their manufactured divisions fall into dust. Unite in your class consciousness, for solidarity is the lifeblood of revolution. Educate one another, arm yourselves with knowledge of the structures that bind you, and organize your efforts toward the liberation of all. Comrades, the system tells you that you are powerless, that your labour is worth only the coin it buys. I tell you with the certainty of history and reason, you are the architects of society. You are the creators of wealth, the bearers of civilization, the indispensable force without which the world cannot turn. Recognize your worth, unite and act, and the system, built on your subjugation, will fall beneath the weight of your collective power. The time for hesitation has passed. The moment of consciousness is now. You are more valuable than the system wants you to believe, and together, in solidarity, your value will reshape the world. The system into which we are born, the social order that surrounds us, operates upon a principle of calculation that is alien to human dignity. From the earliest moments of our existence, society impresses upon us the idea that our value is not inherent, that it is not derived from our creativity, our intellect, or the labour of our hands in the pursuit of meaningful work, but rather from the profit we can generate for those who own the instruments of production. From factories to offices, from farms to service sectors, the measure of a human being has been reduced to a ledger entry, a numerical representation, a wage or salary that symbolizes a fraction of the wealth that we, the labourers, produce. The capitalist order does not care for the fullness of our lives, the richness of our imagination, or the depth of our collective experience. It sees only output, only productivity, only what can be converted into capital for the accumulation of wealth in the hands of a few. This is not a natural state of affairs. It is a deliberate construction designed to maintain hierarchy and to perpetuate exploitation. By reducing people to instruments of profit, a system obscures the inherent human capacities for creativity, solidarity, and self-realization. It alienates us from the products of our labor, ensuring that what we create does not belong to us, but instead is claimed by the owners of factories, the holders of patents, the financiers who never touch the tools of production but reap its rewards. Every invention, every harvest, every manufactured good becomes a symbol not of our collective genius but of our own dispossession. We are taught to internalize this diminishment, to see our worth in the wages we are paid rather than in the labor itself, to identify ourselves not as creators but as cogs, replaceable and disposable. The narrative of merit and individual responsibility is propagated to keep us complicit, convincing us that poverty is the result of personal failure, that wealth is the reward of virtue, when in reality it is the product of systemic theft and the exploitation of labor. Education, culture, and law are all structured to reinforce this calculus of value, to shape minds that do not question the fundamental premise that our lives are worth only as much as they can generate profit. Even our leisure, our rest, our relationships are commodified and made subject to exchange, as if human experience itself were a marketable asset. In the factories, the offices, the fields, we are made to labor not for the satisfaction of our own needs, or for the well-being of our communities, but to sustain the endless accumulation of wealth by those who control the means of production. The rhythm of our lives, the hours of our days, the exertion of our bodies, and the exercise of our intellect are harnessed to serve purposes that are foreign to our own, and yet we are told that this is the natural order, that this is the way of the world. The system's logic is relentless. To maintain its dominance, it must reduce us to our economic function, because a society in which human beings recognize their full value, where labor is understood as the expression of human creativity and social cooperation rather than as a commodity, would be intolerable to the ruling class. This reduction of human life to profit is enforced not only through economic coercion but also through ideology. We are conditioned to equate our self-worth with productivity, to find identity and validation in consumption, to perceive ourselves through the lens of market value. Media, education, religion, and culture operate as instruments to reinforce the belief that our labor defines us, that our bodies and minds are property of the system, and that any deviation from the pursuit of profit is either foolish or morally suspect. It is a subtle but powerful form of domination, one that convinces us to participate in our own subjugation. The consequences are profound. We live in a society where human relationships are transactional, where empathy and solidarity are often subordinated to competition and self-interest, where the measure of a person is reduced to numbers on a payroll or balance sheet. Our health, our creativity, our passions are secondary to our capacity to produce surplus value for others. The system's definition of human worth is narrow, mechanical, and brutal, but it is not unchangeable. To recognize the truth of our own value is to begin to resist, to understand that our lives, our labor, and our collective potential cannot be fully expressed under a system that sees us only as sources of profit. The first act of liberation is awareness, and the awareness that we are more than instruments, more than numbers, more than commodities, is the seed of revolutionary consciousness. Capitalism does not merely extract labor from the masses, it systematically alienates them from the very essence of their humanity, ensuring that the workers remain strangers to themselves, to one another, and to the products of their own labor. In the capitalist system, labor is not an expression of creativity or fulfillment. It is a commodity, something to be bought and sold, something to be directed toward the accumulation of profit for those who own the means of production. The worker, who should be the master of their own activity, becomes instead a tool, a function, a source of surplus value that is never returned in proportion to the effort expended. The factory, the office, the fields, and even the digital workspace are transformed into instruments of alienation, where human beings are severed from the products they create, unable to see themselves reflected in the fruits of their labor, and robbed of the satisfaction that arises from meaningful creation. This alienation extends beyond the work itself. It permeates social relations, community life, and consciousness. Workers are isolated from one another, pitted against each other in competition for wages, promotions, and survival, while the ruling class observes from above, secure in its control over the productive apparatus. In this division lies the system's cunning, by ensuring that workers see each other as rivals rather than allies. Capitalism obscures the enormous collective power they possess. The individual laborer facing the machinery, the boss or the market alone, may feel powerless, small and dispensable, and yet together, organized and conscious of their shared condition, the working class holds the capacity to challenge and ultimately overthrow the structures of exploitation. Alienation also manifests in the separation between the worker and their own intellect, their own skills and their own potential. The worker does not labor to satisfy curiosity, to pursue mastery, or to engage in creative problem-solving for its own sake. The worker labors to meet external demands imposed by owners and managers, to fit into a predetermined system of production whose purpose is accumulation, not human flourishing. The skills that might have been sources of pride, innovation, and social contribution are reduced to instruments of profit, stripped of meaning beyond their economic utility. Even time itself is commodified, partitioned into hours and minutes that are bought and sold, the worker's day dictated not by human rhythms but by the relentless demands of capital. Social consciousness, when it emerges, is often distorted by ideology, education, and media, which teach the individual to accept alienation as natural, to internalize the notion that inequality is inevitable, that one's own subjugation is justified by merit, luck, or fate, and that solidarity is secondary to personal advancement. Yet history shows that the recognition of shared suffering is the birthplace of revolutionary power. The very alienation that capitalism imposes creates the conditions for consciousness, the worker, estrangement from their labor and from their fellow human beings, once understood, reveals the structural injustice of the system, the artificiality of hierarchy and the true source of social wealth. It is this awareness of alienation that can transform despair into action, isolation into solidarity, and exploitation into collective resistance. The capitalist class depends upon the perpetuation of this alienation because the moment workers understand that their labor is the foundation of society, the moment they recognize that they create all wealth yet receive only a fraction of its benefits, the moment they perceive that their isolation is manufactured to prevent unity, the very foundations of capitalist power are shaken. Collective consciousness, rooted in the experience of alienation, is thus both a threat and a possibility. It is the invisible force that, when activated, can dismantle the structures of oppression, for the workers are the indispensable agents of production, the true source of value, the creators of wealth, and yet they are rendered powerless only by division and ignorance. To see through the veil of alienation is to awaken to one's own strength, to realize that the chains of capitalism are not inevitable and that solidarity, organization, and conscious action are the material instruments of liberation. Every strike, every protest, every collective negotiation of rights is a rupture in the system of alienation, a moment in which the worker begins to reclaim agency, asserting the reality that labor is not a commodity, that human life is not measured in wages, and that the collective power of the workers can confront, constrain, and eventually overthrow the system that seeks to divide and exploit them. The alienation imposed by capitalism is therefore both a tool of oppression and the seed of resistance. For in understanding the depths of our estrangement, we also understand the means of our liberation, and the awareness of our collective power becomes the engine of revolutionary transformation, compelling us to organize, to unite, and to reclaim the society that has been built upon our exploitation. The true measure of human value cannot be found in the accumulation of property, in the possession of capital, or in the ostentatious display of wealth. It resides instead in labor, in the capacity to transform raw materials, ideas, and effort into the products, knowledge, and institutions that sustain society. Every building, every machine, every crop, every service, every innovation arises from the hands, the minds, and the sweat of the working class. Yet capitalism, in its relentless pursuit of accumulation, seeks to obscure this fundamental truth, diverting attention from the source of all wealth and convincing society that ownership, rather than production, is the measure of value. The capitalist class does not create, it appropriates. It does not labor, it controls. It does not generate society's progress, it profits from it. The worker, by contrast, produces not only material wealth but the very conditions of social life, education, culture, and technological advancement. Without the labor of millions, the industries that dominate our cities, the infrastructure that sustains commerce, and the knowledge that propels innovation would cease to exist. And yet, in the very act of creating the conditions for civilization, the worker is denied recognition and reward. The product of labor is alienated from the laborer. It is seized as property by the owner of capital, while the laborer receives only a fraction of the wealth they have generated. A wage determined not by the true value of their contribution, but by the bargaining power imposed upon them by a system designed to concentrate wealth and power in the hands of the few. This inversion of justice is systemic, deliberate. The laborer's role is fundamental, indispensable, and yet systematically undervalued for to recognize the true source of society. As wealth is to challenge the legitimacy of those who claim dominion over it. In the fields, workers transform the earth into nourishment. In factories, they transform raw materials into tools and products that serve countless lives. In offices and laboratories, they transform knowledge into innovation that propels society forward. All progress, whether material, technological, or social, is inseparable from the activity of the laboring masses. History, if honestly examined, reveals that no empire, no nation, no industrial triumph has ever been built upon the toil of the ruling class alone. It is always the hands of the workers, the collective effort of the many, that generates wealth, that constructs the foundations of society, and that advances the conditions of human existence. Capitalism, by hiding this fact, perpetuates a narrative of dependence and hierarchy, convincing workers that they are subordinate, that their efforts are secondary, and that their creativity and energy are the property of others. By portraying ownership as the source of power and wealth, the system diminishes the recognition of the worker as essential role and undermines the understanding that society, as progress, is the product of collective labor. Yet the truth is immutable. Without workers, the factories fall silent, the fields lie barren, the machines rust, and the engines of society grind to a halt. The supposed leaders and owners, divorced from productive labor, can maintain control only as long as they monopolize the instruments of production and exploit the labor of the many. Workers are, in reality, the foundation of all social and economic life, the creators of value, and the driving force behind every advance that civilization achieves. To deny this fact is to deny the very principle of justice, for the wealth of a society is inseparable from the effort of those who produce it. Recognition of labor as the source of true value is not merely a matter of morality, it is a matter of strategy, of power, and of historical truth. Once the working class comprehends that it is the origin of all wealth, it begins to see that its position is not one of subservience but of potential dominance. The collective labor of society is the ultimate lever by which social structures can be transformed, by which inequality can be challenged, and by which the surplus value extracted by the few can be reclaimed by the many. Every wage paid, every product consumed, every service used is a testament to the laborer as contribution, yet under capitalism, the majority of the wealth generated is siphoned to a tiny minority. Awareness of this injustice is the beginning of consciousness, and consciousness is the precursor to organized action. Workers who understand that they create all wealth begin to see the system not as benevolent or inevitable, but as exploitative, and they recognize the possibility of redirecting the fruits of their labor toward the collective good. Social progress, technological innovation, and cultural advancement are the products of labor, and the liberation of the worker is inseparable from the liberation of society itself. Every improvement in the human condition, every expansion of knowledge, every advance in living standards has been won through labor, struggle, and organization, and the acknowledgement of this fact is the foundation upon which revolutionary transformation is built. To grasp that workers are the source of society, as progress is to recognize one, as own power, the capacity of the collective to reshape the world, and the injustice inherent in a system that denies labor its proper value. And once this recognition spreads, the possibility of reclaiming wealth, dignity, and justice becomes not only conceivable but inevitable. The power of the oppressed lies not in isolated acts of discontent, not in individual gestures of resistance, but in unity. A single worker, a solitary protester, or an individual voice raised against injustice may inspire, but alone it cannot dismantle the structures that perpetuate exploitation. Capitalism thrives on division, on the belief that workers are separate, competing, and powerless, and it uses every tool at its disposal, ideology, education, culture, media, and law, to ensure that solidarity is fragmented. The ruling class depends upon our disunity, for only when we remain isolated can they maintain their control over the means of production, over knowledge, and over the social order itself. But when workers recognize that they share a common condition, when they perceive that their struggles are not personal failures but systemic realities, the foundations of oppression begin to tremble. Class consciousness is the awakening of this realization. It is the understanding that exploitation is not an accident, that poverty is not the result of laziness, that inequality is not the natural order. It is the awareness that the wealth of society, the infrastructure of civilization, and the very material conditions of life are created by the labor of the many and appropriated by the few. This consciousness transforms despair into clarity, isolation into connection, and powerlessness into strategy. It is the spark that illuminates the path toward organized struggle. Organized struggle is not chaos. It is method. It is plan. It is the deliberate coordination of collective energy toward the dismantling of oppressive systems. It is the recognition that the tools of revolution are not merely passion or outrage, but strategy, knowledge, and the deliberate alignment of labor toward the common purpose of liberation. Strikes, unions, political education, mass movements, protests, and coordinated resistance are not acts of rebellion for their own sake. They are instruments of systemic change. They are the mechanisms by which the oppressed assert their presence, claim their rights, and challenge the legitimacy of a system built on exploitation. To engage in organized struggle without class consciousness is to act blindly, without purpose. To possess class consciousness without organization is to remain powerless, like sparks scattered by the wind. It is the combination of awareness and coordinated action that threatens the edifice of capitalist oppression. History shows that when workers unite in consciousness and organization, they can challenge even the most entrenched forms of authority. Revolutions are never the work of a single individual or a disconnected multitude. They are the product of collective understanding, coordinated action. and the relentless refusal to accept subjugation. The ruling class, aware of this truth, invests enormous resources in preventing unity, in fragmenting movements, and in cultivating ideologies that convince workers that their struggles are personal, that their failures are natural, and that their comrades are competitors rather than allies. To pierce this veil is the first revolutionary act, for recognition of shared exploitation naturally leads to recognition of collective power. The worker who sees themselves as part of a class with shared interests begins to understand that their labour, once harnessed collectively, is an instrument of liberation. Each individual, while powerless alone, becomes indispensable in the context of organised struggle, for the strength of the movement is proportional to the recognition of common purpose, solidarity and commitment. Class consciousness without unity is impotent. Unity without consciousness is aimless. Only together, with awareness of the systemic forces that bind us, and with the deliberate application of collective effort, can the oppressed begin to dismantle the structures that maintain inequality, suppress freedom, and perpetuate suffering. Education, mutual aid, shared experience, and political engagement are the threads that weave unity, and within this web, power emerges not as a gift from the ruling class, not as a concession, but as a product of coordinated, intentional action. The factories, the fields, the offices, and every domain of labour are sites of latent power, for the workers who inhabit them hold the keys to production, to knowledge, and to society itself. To organize is to take ownership of that power, to channel it towards systemic change, and to challenge the legitimacy of oppression. Every strike, every assembly, every collective demand is a blow against the ideology of division, a demonstration that the unity of the working class cannot be ignored, and that when consciousness meets organized action, oppression cannot endure. It is this recognition, this fusion of awareness, solidarity, and purposeful action that is the material force capable of overthrowing injustice, dismantling exploitation, and creating a society in which human life, labour, and creativity are valued for their true worth. And when workers act together with class consciousness and organization, the illusion of invincibility that sustains oppression begins to crumble, revealing the power of the many over the few. The first step toward liberation, the ignition of revolutionary potential, is the recognition of one's own worth. For too long, the system has taught the oppressed to doubt themselves, to measure their lives against the narrow metrics of profit, and to accept the false narrative that their labour, their creativity, and their existence are secondary. To recognize one's worth is to see oneself not as a disposable cog, not as a passive observer of injustice, but as the very foundation upon which society is built. Every product of civilization, every technological advancement, every institution, and every cultural achievement exists because of the labour of human beings, and to claim one's worth is to acknowledge this undeniable truth. This recognition is not an abstract sentiment. It is a material understanding grounded in the reality of production, in the knowledge that without the collective work of the many, the wealth of the few could not exist. It is a reclamation of power, for the worker who understands their own indispensability begins to see that the structures of domination are sustained only by their compliance, by their silence, and by their acceptance of subjugation. Once worth is recognized, it naturally leads to the awareness that acting collectively amplifies that power. Individual consciousness, while necessary, is insufficient on its own, for oppression thrives where the isolated mind struggles against systemic forces beyond its reach. It is only through collective action that the latent strength of the oppressed is transformed into tangible force capable of challenging entrenched hierarchies. When workers, peasants, students, and all those marginalized by the system unite in purpose, they become a single, coherent body whose labor, intellect, and initiative cannot be ignored or easily suppressed. Collective action turns individual worth into social leverage, transforming awareness into agency and power into possibility. History offers countless examples: the achievements of labor movements, the victories of revolutions, and the social reforms forced by united struggle all emerge from the convergence of self-recognition and collective mobilization. The recognition of personal value destabilizes the ideological foundations of oppression. For when individuals no longer see themselves as expendable, they refuse to accept conditions designed to exploit them. When that awareness spreads among a community of workers, it becomes contagious, and the collective consciousness awakens a force that is both material and ideological, capable of confronting exploitation, challenging authority, and demanding justice. Revolution is not the spontaneous eruption of anger. It is the deliberate outcome of recognition combined with organized effort. Acting collectively is the method by which the oppressed translate their inherent worth into social transformation. It allows for the coordination of labor, knowledge, and strategy in ways that directly challenge the structures of wealth and power. Strikes, assemblies, councils, and organized networks are not merely tactical maneuvers. They are expressions of a deeper truth, a demonstration that those who create society's wealth also hold the potential to reshape it. Recognition of worth and collective action are mutually reinforcing. Awareness of value motivates participation in struggle, while engagement in organized action strengthens the understanding of one's own significance. Each act of solidarity, each coordinated effort, each challenge to oppression is both an assertion of human dignity and a material blow against the system that seeks to suppress it. Moreover, the process of acting collectively nurtures further consciousness, teaching participants the dynamics of power, the mechanics of exploitation, and the principles of justice. The oppressed learn not only to demand rights, but to construct alternatives, to envision a society where wealth, knowledge, and opportunity are distributed according to need and contribution rather than inheritance, ownership, or coercion. This dual-process recognition of worth and collective action creates the conditions for transformative change, not only in the political and economic realms, but also in social and cultural life, for the very relationships that sustain oppression, based on hierarchy, competition, and alienation, are replaced by networks of solidarity, cooperation, and mutual respect. Social transformation is therefore inseparable from the awakening of human dignity and the organized assertion of power. The revolutionary path begins with the individual, but it cannot remain there. It spreads through communities, workplaces, neighborhoods, and nations, uniting those who've been marginalized and silenced under the banner of common purpose. The knowledge that each person is valuable, combined with the deliberate harnessing of collective strength, becomes the engine of change, the mechanism through which society can be restructured in accordance with justice, equity, and human potential. Recognition of worth without action leads only to private enlightenment, and action without awareness leads to aimless struggle, but together they form the material basis for revolutionary transformation. Every movement, every struggle, every demand for justice is a testimony to this principle, proving that when individuals know their value and organize accordingly, oppression can be confronted, challenged, and ultimately dismantled. For the power of the many, united in consciousness and purpose, is the true source of societal change. Comrades, hear this clearly. The system would have you believe that you are powerless, that your labor is worthless, that your life is a commodity, and that the structures that bind you are eternal. But we have seen the truth. We have seen that your value is not determined by wages, by property, or by the approval of those who exploit you. Your worth flows from your labor, from your capacity to create, to sustain, and to transform the world. The system survives only by dividing you, by keeping you unaware of your collective power, by convincing you that isolation is your natural condition. But when you unite, when class consciousness awakens, when your collective strength is harnessed in organized struggle, the illusions of capitalism crumble before the reality of your potential. Recognize your worth, act in solidarity, and refuse to accept the false limitations imposed upon you. The wealth of society, the power that sustains oppression, and the structures of inequality all rest upon your labour, and in that very fact lies the seed of your liberation. Together, in awareness, in unity, in coordinated action, you hold the capacity to dismantle exploitation, to reclaim your rightful place as the creators of value, and to forge a society in which labour serves humanity rather than profit, in which human dignity and freedom are the measure of all things. The road ahead is not easy, and the forces of domination will resist with every tool at their disposal, but your power is real, and it is collective. Rise, comrades, and let the world bear witness to the undeniable truth. The workers, united in consciousness and struggle, are the architects of revolutionary transformation, and the society that has denied your value will be remade by the recognition of your worth, the force of your solidarity, and the unbreakable resolve of those who refuse to be exploited any longer.